everyone. My name is Daniela Redondo, and I am part of the Given Policy team. I will be following the negotiations on biodiversity and climate change during COP16, and I am really happy to share with you a little bit more about item 25 and what is going to be discussed this year in Cali. So really quick, I would like just to remind some of the concepts. The first is biodiversity, and the Convention on Biological Diversity defines biological diversity or biodiversity as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including their ecosystems and including the diversity within the species. Then we have the definition of climate change, which is the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns in the planet. And this can be natural, but it's important to notice that since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change. I also would like to share with you which are the top polluting industries relating to carbon dioxide emissions and in general to greenhouse gas emissions. And the first one is fossil fuels by far. It's the most polluting industry. Then we have agriculture. This one is particularly interesting because of the links that has with biodiversity. Then we have fashion, and other polluting industries are food retail, transport, construction. I would also like to talk about climate change and the impacts that it has on biodiversity. The first one is that as climate change, what it's doing is changing temperatures, it is affecting the distribution and functionality of ecosystems. It also alters the precipitation regimes. It facilitates the spread and establishment of invasive species. In general, it's affecting the ability of all ecosystems to regulate themselves, like regulate water flows. And they are also, and this is a key point, at the same time that climate change is having an impact on biodiversity, this impact is doing that biodiversity reduces its ability, or ecosystems especially, reduces their ability to sequester or retain carbon. So it is actually getting worse, the effects. As a result of all of these, species are facing an increased extinction risk, and ecosystems may not function anymore as they are functioning right now. Well, it's already happening. We already have the bad effects on ecosystems, but it can be worse. Then, now that we understand a little bit or remind a little bit about the concepts, let's talk about the linkages not only in impacts, because climate change is negatively impacting biodiversity, but biodiversity has a role, can be part of mitigation and adaptation activities to climate change. So if we talk about mitigation, which means reducing emissions, we now know that ecosystems absorb more than the 50% of man-made carbon emissions. And if we talk about adaptation, which means having activities to build resilience to climate change, because climate change is not going anywhere. It's already here, and we need to do something to have the least negative impacts as possible, and that's basically adaptation. So biodiversity helps to build this resilience and to adapt to climate change. And related to adaptation, also to mitigation, but more to adaptation, we have maybe the most popular concept that links climate change and biodiversity. And that concept is nature-based solutions. Until 2022, we countries didn't have like a definition that agreed together about what nature-based solutions are. The Convention on Biological Diversity has not a definition of nature-based solutions, is mainly relating to UNEP's definition that we have here and that I will read for you. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. So it's an interesting definition, but one of the points that are important to remember is that it is still an umbrella concept. So many things can be considered nature-based solutions. And in 2021, it has been released a global youth position statement on nature-based solutions, which states that nature-based solutions are generating risks mostly for indigenous and local communities, and that they don't replace the urgent need of reducing the emissions. So I will invite you to read this global youth position statement on nature-based solutions to know a little bit more about what we need to consider when talking about nature-based solutions. Even if this one was released on 2021 and the definition on 2022, it applies exactly the same because the concept is still an umbrella concept and we still need to think about safeguards, to think about a human rights approach when talking about nature-based solutions. So I will invite you to read it, to have more information in detail about this. And then after this introduction, right now I would like to share with you a little bit more about the item itself, talking about the negotiations and what important topics are about to be discussed at COP16 in the climate and biodiversity topic. So again, before going through the document and specific points that we need to understand to follow the negotiations on climate and biodiversity, I would like to recall a little bit about which is the linkages between climate and the global biodiversity framework. And we have climate change being, on climate being mentioned twice in the framework. First of all, in Target 8, which corresponds to reducing threats to biodiversity, and it talks mainly about minimizing the impact of climate change. And then we have Target 11, that corresponds to meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. And it's talking about the importance of restoring, maintaining, and enhancing nature's contribution to people. And this includes the regulation of climate. So continuing a little bit with the background, we had the framework adopted in 2022. The same year, the Secretariat decided to continue and open the negotiations on biodiversity and climate change. So the technical body of the convention starts to gather information of the parties about this topic of biodiversity and climate change, and that's how we arrived to the document that it's going to be negotiated at COP16. And one of the interesting points that are being mentioned in the document are these. So the first is the interdependency between biodiversity loss and climate change crisis, and the need to be addressed in a coherent and balanced manner, which means that biodiversity, climate, desertification conventions, and SDGs, and all policies that we have on environmental sphere should be connected and try to avoid the duplication of efforts. Then another interesting point is that it's being recognized that subsidies to fossil fuels have a negative impact on biodiversity. Also, that the impact, it's recognized the impact of increased carbon dioxide emissions on the ocean, and also the critical role of biodiversity for effective mitigation and adaptation, which is basically what we just said before. We have also as an interesting point that it's being recognized the importance of promoting landscape connectivity and the role of the ocean in regulating the climate, and the need that it's a little bit related to the first point, the need to strengthen institutional linkages across all UN mandates and their process to avoid duplication of efforts. So these are points, most of them mentions recognitions that are important to have in mind. And then I would like to talk more about key points. Some of the points that we need to pay attention specifically for negotiations. First one is that biodiversity and ecosystem resilience to climate change are decreased by maladaptive actions. These could include bioenergy plantations, replacing natural forests, etc. One important thing that I forgot to mention is that all these bullet points that you can see in the screen are parts of the document. So this language in general, this is what you can find in the document. So yes, so it's being recognized that biodiversity and ecosystem resilience to climate change are decreased by maladaptive actions like those. And then we have the concept of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. And then we have something that's interesting to analyze is that it's being mentioned to implement strong social and environmental safeguards, which might be good because we are getting closer to human rights-based approach, which is a concept that we also have in the document. Then other key point, it's the urgent and sustained reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels, which was one of the things that when I share with you a little bit more about the nature-based solutions concept, that it's some of the things that we need to keep in mind when talking about the nature-based solutions. So it's a good thing to have it there. Then another key point is the need for enhanced international cooperation and synergies, including through capacity building. It's mentioned like twice, capacity building to address climate change through biodiversity. So that's important point too. Then we have provide new and additional resources to collectively scale up investments for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem restoration. This is also an important point because we are talking about finance. It's also related to that negotiation item, but it's another important topic that it's going to be discussed. Resources, financial resources to support climate and biodiversity actions. And finally, another key point that it's actually really important is assessment. Parties are encouraged to assess, manage, and avoid the potential adverse impacts on biodiversity that could arise from the economic and sectoral transitions as a response to climate change. And this is also important to consider because if we don't really know the specific impacts that we are having on biodiversity, so how are we going to make it better or to stop what is happening wrong? So this is also an important point to have in mind, the assessment of the impacts on biodiversity. Finally, I added 2 points that I think we need to take into consideration if we're following this item on climate and biodiversity. And it's that not everything it's going to be agreed in this COP. Actually, and this is important point too, the whole entire text it's in brackets, so it's going to be. It seems to be a hard. It's going to be a hard work to do to do this item and document the reviews. But yes, so take into consideration that submissions of existing information on carbon and biodiversity credits and offsets and other market-based approaches and their effects on biodiversity are going to be gathered towards COP17. And that's an important point to keep in mind, even if this is just like it's not happening in COP16, just have in mind that this is something that it's going to be in the discussions and that we need to keep an eye on that. And then finally, another thing that it's not asked for this COP is to develop a supplement to the voluntary guidelines for the design and effective implementation of ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risks reduction. And this is asked towards COP18, sorry. That's important because, as it said, it already exists, these voluntary guidelines, but they need to be more specific, and this is why it's being asked to have a supplement to what it's already there. So yes, so it's basically the item 25, what's happening, why or how we arrived here. It's going to be challenging because, as I said before, the whole text is in brackets. But yes, if you have any doubt or comment, you can contact me and the policy team. Thank you.